Before we get started, go over some of the logistics. The audio for today's webinar is being broadcast through your computer. Please make sure your speakers are turned on or your headphones are plugged in. You can control the audio broadcast via the audio broadcast panel. If you accidentally close the panel, you can reopen it by going to the Communicate menu at the top of the screen and choosing Join Audio Broadcast. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer or would prefer to listen by phone, the dial-in information is on your screen to the right. Real-time captioning is provided during this webinar. The captions can be found in Media Viewer panel, which appears in the lower right-hand corner of the webinar platform. If you'd like to make the Media Viewer panel larger, you can minimize the panels such as Chat, Q&A, and/or Participants. For Q&A, please use the Q&A box to submit any questions you have during the webinar, and we will direct those questions accordingly during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you are listening by phone and not logged in to the webinar, you may also ask questions by emailing questions to kauchenbach@ndi-inc.org. Please note this webinar is being recorded and the materials will be placed on the Able National Resource Center website. During the webinar, if you experience any technical difficulties, please use the chat box to send a message to the host NDI admin, or you may also email kauchenbach@ndi-inc.org. I would just like to quickly introduce our presenters and guests. My name is Chris Rodriguez. I am the Director of the Able National Resource Center, and I will be doing the presenting of the slides today. We also have our facilitator, Michael Morris, Executive Director of National Disability Institute, and we have a great panel of guest experts consisting of Kelly Israel, who is the Policy Analyst for the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, Courtney Hansen, who's a parent, a disability advocate, and a blogger. And we also have Jim Balson, who is Someday Solution for State-Sponsored Savings Plans Managing Director with BNY Mellon. So just to briefly go over an agenda today, we are going to talk a little bit about the Able National Resource Center, what that is, what it consists of, introduce you again to the #AbleToSave campaign, which is a month-long public awareness campaign. We're going to build just a very quick foundation in terms of what ABLE is. That will consist of the ABLE basics. And then we're going to get into the bulk of the presentation, which is focused on what exactly ABLE funds can be spent on, or exactly what are called qualified disability expenses. We'll then give some examples, and then I want to turn it over to our guest panelists for some Q&A, and then hopefully we'll have time to take some questions that our audience has been submitting throughout the presentation. So, the Able National Resource Center. The Able National Resource Center is a collaborative whose supporters share the goal of accelerating the design and availability of ABLE accounts for the benefit of individuals with disabilities and their families. We bring together the investment, support, and resources of the country's largest and most influential national disability organizations. And I encourage folks who want to know more about the Able National Resource Center or who would like to have more information about all things related to ABLE to visit our website at www.ablenrc.org. I want to now talk just briefly about our #AbleToSave campaign. Our #AbleToSave campaign is a month-long marketing and informational campaign taking place throughout the entire month of August. The national campaign is spearheaded by the Able National Resource Center in collaboration with the Center's 25+ national disability organizational members, state ABLE programs, financial institutions, and other ABLE-related stakeholders. The #AbleToSave campaign will strive to blanket the country with widespread information concerning all things related to ABLE, with the aim to significantly accelerate the opening of ABLE accounts by eligible individuals with disabilities and their families. Again, the primary goal of the hashtag #AbleToSave campaign is to increase awareness and education about ABLE accounts and to accelerate the opening of these ABLE accounts nationwide, both in the short and long term, so that people with disabilities who are eligible to have these accounts can start to take advantage of the opportunities of having a better economic future as a result of being able to save funds for many times the first time in these accounts without jeopardizing their means-tested benefits. Again, the #AbleToSave campaign will take place throughout the entire month of August and is actually broken down into 5 individual weeks of education, information, and marketing. Each week focuses on a different aspect of ABLE with the aim to provide potential ABLE account owners and their families with comprehensive education and motivation to feel comfortable enrolling in an ABLE program of their choosing. We're currently in week 3, which we're focusing again on qualified disability expenses, and that's going to be what the bulk of this presentation is about. Next week we talk about financial literacy and how that plays a role in ABLE. And then our final week we talk about enrollment and what that looks like and how to compare various ABLE programs. Again, it's important to note that all the information and materials that we've built for the hashtag #AbleToSave campaign is located on the ABLE National Resource Center website. So in case you missed some information related to some of the previous weeks, you can always go to the website to check out former webinars, materials, videos, and things like that. Again, the campaign is national in scale and will utilize a diverse set of tools in order to maximize reach. These tools include, but are not limited to, our social media, our national webinars, our short videos that we've developed, Twitter chats, virtual town halls, and email blasts, and the utilization of the Center's website. So I encourage you guys to check out all those different resources in order to get as much information about the campaign and information in general about ABLE as the campaign moves forward and then throughout the year. Okay. So before we get into the bulk of the presentation on qualified disability expenses, or what the funds in an ABLE account can be used for, let's go over some of the ABLE basics. So the Stephen Beck Jr. Achieving a Better Life Experience Act, or ABLE Act, what it basically does is it amends the federal tax code to add what's called Section 529A. And what that does is it creates a new option for eligible people with disabilities to save money in a tax-exempt account that may be used for qualified disability expenses while still keeping the beneficiary's eligibility for their federal public benefits. Some basic characteristics that we want to make sure that everybody is aware of consist of the fact that there are eligibility criteria related to opening an ABLE account that speak to the age in which the individual first experienced his or her disability and related to the severity of such disability. Last week we dedicated the information and materials developed to understanding to a greater extent what these eligibility requirements are, so I'd encourage folks to go to the website and check those out for getting a better idea of exactly what that means. Additionally, an eligible individual is not obligated to enroll in their state of residence. So this means that provided that you meet those criteria that would allow a person with a disability to open up an ABLE account, they don't necessarily need to open up that account in their state of residence. In fact, there are multiple programs that are accepting individuals nationwide, again, provided that they meet the eligibility criteria. Additionally, the designated beneficiary is the account owner, so that's very important to understand. When the ABLE Act was created and developed and became law, we wanted to make sure that people with disabilities had the opportunity to exercise as much authority over their own financial means as possible. So we wanted to make sure that these ABLE accounts, that the funds in there belonged to the person with a disability, which is the designated beneficiary. That being said, if the designated beneficiary, which is the person with a disability, either has been found not to have the capacity to oversee the account, or if they just want help and they want to put somebody else, the ability of somebody else to have oversight of the account, there are 3 types of people that can have that type of authority. And they are the person's parent, if the person is a minor, if they're an adult, their guardian, or a person with power of attorney may have what's called signature authority that basically allows them to exercise authority over the account and oversee the account on behalf of the person with a disability who is the account owner. Funds in the account may be used for what's called qualified disability-related expenses, and this is basically what this webinar is going to concentrate on, understanding what exactly is a qualified disability-related expense. It's also important to note that assets in and distributions for qualified disability-related expenses will be disregarded or given special treatment when determining eligibility for most federal means tested benefits, including Social Security and Medicaid. So that's something that, to me at least, really makes this program and these accounts so incredibly beneficial to so many people with disabilities who for years have been told that they are really not allowed to save money for fear of losing vital supports and services provided by various federally funded means-tested benefits, perhaps most notably Supplemental Security Income, SSI, and Medicaid. Now, what is so special is that for the first time in many circumstances, through an ABLE account, people can save significant amounts of money, more than they ever could have, without jeopardizing their eligibility for those various federal public benefits. So that's an incredibly important aspect of ABLE accounts. Multiple individuals may contribute to an individual's ABLE account. That includes really anybody can contribute into somebody's ABLE account, including their friends, their family, and the beneficiary themselves, perhaps as a result of money that they're making because of employment. They can contribute those funds into their ABLE account as well. But while anybody can contribute into somebody's ABLE account, it's important to note that all those contributions combined in any given tax year from all the contributors cannot exceed $14,000 per tax year. So the account can only accept up to $14,000 worth of contributions, again, from all contributors combined in any given tax year, and that's obviously from January 1 to December 31st, and then after that it can accept an additional $14,000 in the next tax year. So that's something to keep in mind. So now that we've kind of given some basic information about the very basic concepts and components of ABLE accounts, we want to concentrate today on our main topic, and that's really fully understanding what exactly can ABLE funds or funds contributed into an ABLE account, what can they be used for, what are they allowed to be used for, and that's where we're going to begin our conversation right now with qualified disability expenses. So, distributions from an ABLE account can be used to offset the costs of what are called qualified disability expenses. And qualified disability expenses are expenses that relate to the designated beneficiary's blindness or disability and are for the benefit of that designated beneficiary in maintaining or improving his or her health, independence, or quality of life. So that's the basic definition of what these ABLE funds or what funds contributed into an ABLE account can be used for. And as you can imagine, this is an incredibly broad definition in terms of what the funds can be spent for. And we wanted to make sure that it was a broad definition because we can appreciate the wide range of different needs that people with disabilities have, especially people with disabilities severe enough to meet the criteria that would allow them to have an ABLE account. So when Congress put this law together, they actually gave some what I call kind of buckets or categories of what these qualified disability expenses could fall under. So we put these together for you on this following slide, and as you can see again, it is a wide variety of different things. So what you see there that's in bold: education, housing, transportation, employment and training supports, assistive technology and personal support services, health, prevention and wellness, financial management and assistive services, legal fees, expenses for oversight and monitoring. Basic living expenses were even included through the Department of Treasury's guidance. And it also includes things like funeral and burial expenses. So these are the different buckets or areas that were provided by Congress to make suggestions on what categories these quote, qualified disability expenses could fall over. And we kind of extended that to give examples of what those could include. So as an example, you know, under transportation, we've included, as an example, you know, a taxi. Perhaps somebody, as a result of having a disability, cannot operate a motor vehicle, and therefore, you know, to get to and from perhaps their place of employment, they need to utilize a taxi service. They could use their ABLE funds for that. Health, prevention, and wellness. Perhaps as a result of having a disability, they have certain dietary restrictions and they have to have special types of food. Well, you could use your ABLE funds to purchase those kinds of things, or perhaps things that aren't covered under either the individual's private insurance or even through Medicaid, or to supplement those things they could be used for. So again, as you can see on the screen, we made sure that qualified disability expenses were very broad in terms of what they could be used for. We wanted to make sure that they were not rigid because, again, we can appreciate how diverse the needs of people with disabilities are. Again, we wanted to put this back up there again just to, again, emphasize how broad of a definition this is after seeing kind of that fairly expansive list of different categories that these qualified disability expenses could fall under. I wanted to expand on that just a little bit in saying that the term qualified disability expenses should again be defined broadly and permit the inclusion of even things like basic living expenses, and should not be limited to things that have a medical necessity. So these aren't dollars that can only be used for things that perhaps a physician has signed off for. So they're much different from what you might consider Medicaid dollars to be able to be spent with, that often have much more stringent parameters in terms of what they can be used for. There's no medical necessity. You don't have to go to a doctor. The doctor doesn't have to sign a prescription saying that you need X, Y, and Z for you to be allowed to use your ABLE funds. It's much broader than that. Additionally, there's not an exemption, or there's not a disallowance for using the funds to buy things that may have perhaps a peripheral benefit to others. Now, while the benefit does have to be primarily for the beneficiary's benefit, if there are some peripheral benefits to others, that is permissible. But again, you want to make sure that these expenses, these qualified expenses, are for really the benefit of the beneficiary, the person with the disability themselves. And it's also very important to note, and we'll talk about this in greater detail in a few more slides, but that funds used for qualified disability expenses are not included in taxable income. So that's another big benefit. The funds contributed into an account, they actually grow tax-free, and provided that they are used for qualified disability expenses, they are dispersed tax-free, and you don't have to pay any taxes on those disbursements, provided that, again, they're used on qualified disability-related expenses. So I wanted to touch on just a couple different categories that I thought were especially important to recognize, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this one here in terms of employment with one of our guest panelists in a little bit, but I did want to just mention a couple things, because I know that the disability community, especially the advocacy community, has worked extremely hard over the past couple decades to make sure that people with disabilities are included in terms of building a better financial future, and one of those big building blocks in that is providing opportunities for employment for people with disabilities. And we wanted to make sure that people understand that in addition to other disability-related expenses, funds in an ABLE account can be used for employment-related expenses to help an ABLE account owner secure and maintain employment. And we wanted to just kind of expand on this a little bit to note that ABLE funds can be used for things like job coaches, can be used for costs associated with certificates, accreditations, and our job-related trainings. They could be used for things like interview prep and resume development. They can be used for transportation to and from a beneficiary's place of employment, and help with financial management, education, and assistance in terms of funds that are, perhaps acquired as a result of having employment. And in addition to all this, there's actually a paper that was developed by what's called the LEAD Center that talks in much greater depth about how ABLE funds can be used to have better employment outcomes for people with disabilities. And we have the primary author actually is one of our panelists today, so she's going to help shed some more light on some of the highlights from that paper here in a little bit. But I did want to point that out because I think employment is such a big deal for people with disabilities, and it's incredibly unfortunate that currently people with disabilities have significantly low rates of employment in the United States as compared to other people. So this is just an example on how ABLE can be used as a tool to try and help people with disabilities better not only find and secure employment, but maintain employment as well in integrated and competitive settings. In addition, I wanted to talk a little bit about Medicaid and how funds in an ABLE account can be used to supplement Medicaid services or services provided through Medicaid. As many people know, Medicaid is really the backbone in terms of supports and services provided to people with disabilities, of which Medicaid provides supports and services that by and large oftentimes cannot be found through any other vehicle, including private insurance or insurance purchased off of the exchanges or employer-based insurance programs. And the ABLE Act explicitly states, specifically states that it is designed to supplement rather than supplant benefits and services provided by other sources, and therefore it can cover gaps in services and supports, and for some people enable them to maintain Medicaid coverage while possibly saving up for future expenses. So I think that's incredibly important. And then kind of tying back in with employment, many states have what's called Medicaid buy-in programs, where the individual basically buys into the Medicaid program and pays premiums. Now, you can use ABLE funds to pay for those premiums to secure the Medicaid supports and services even while maintaining employment and having an earned income. So that's another example of how ABLE funds can be used to better secure employment and to perhaps bridge some gaps in between the loss of services and supports, or to supplement those without supplanting them necessarily. Lastly, I wanted to touch a little bit more about housing expenses, because this is very interesting. It's important to note that funds in an ABLE account can also be used for housing expenses, including things like rent. And in addition to that, funds used for housing expenses will not affect the beneficiary's SSI, or supplemental security income, or be seen as in-kind support and maintenance, so long as the funds are dispersed from the account in the same month in which the housing expense is paid. So this is something that's very important to keep in mind, and one of the key, or one of the fundamental components, I think, that separates an ABLE account from, let's say, a special needs account that oftentimes can't be used for things like rent without jeopardizing to a certain extent the individual's cash benefit provided by supplemental security income. Now, of course, if the individual is not receiving or is not a beneficiary of SSI, then of course they wouldn't have to worry about that, and they could obviously still use ABLE funds for housing expenses such as rent or mortgage. So those are three areas that I just wanted to touch on specifically, in addition to the other categories, just because I thought they were especially important to understand in order to fully appreciate the benefits provided by having an ABLE account. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about, we've discussed what these ABLE funds can be used for, what exactly is a qualified disability-related expense. Now I want to talk just briefly about how exactly do folks access the funds that have been contributed into their ABLE account, and how does somebody spend ABLE funds. So it's important to note that the ABLE account owner does not need authorization, pre-approval, or any kind of permission to spend the funds in their ABLE account. They can do so on their own. Different ABLE programs offer various ways to access the funds in the account owner's account, including some programs actually offer prepaid debit cards. So this is something that an ABLE account or a potential ABLE account owner might be interested in, depending on what their particular needs are. If the ABLE account owner, the person with a disability, knows that they're going to be using the funds in the account pretty frequently, then perhaps they'd be more interested in a program that offers one of these prepaid debit cards that would allow them very quick access to the funds in the account. In other circumstances and other programs, there's different ways to access the funds, and those may take a couple days in order to get the money dispersed into, say, a checking account or something like that. So that's some things to keep in mind when choosing one program over another. But again, it is important to note that unlike perhaps a pooled trust or things like that, where you have a little more stringent oversight of the account in terms of what it's spent on, ABLE accounts allow far more latitude in terms of not only the things that they can be spent on, but how quickly the money can be used. And I think that's demonstrated by the fact that, again, the account owner does not need authorization, pre-approval, or any kind of permission to spend those funds. That being said, again, it is important to note that spending ABLE funds on non-qualified expenses, things that are not allowed under the program, will result in tax penalties and consequences, and in fact may affect the beneficiary's eligibility for federally funded benefits, of which we know how important a lot of those federally funded means-tested benefits are for people with disabilities. So it is obviously strongly advised that not only do ABLE account owners understand what these funds can be used for, but that they make sure that they stay within those parameters so that, one, again, they don't fall victim to any of these tax penalties and tax consequences, but maybe more importantly, and probably more importantly, they don't find themselves in a position where they could be jeopardizing their eligibility for things like Medicaid or SSI or HUD benefits or things like that as a result of misusing these funds, using them on things that would be considered to be non-qualified expenses. So that's something that's very important to understand. Okay, so to go into a little deeper detail on the misuse of funds, we want to say exactly what some of those penalties could be. What happens if ABLE funds are misused? So this is one aspect in terms of kind of maybe not being in line with the way that these accounts are supposed to be used. It's important to note that each qualified individual can only have one ABLE account at any given time, and that if an individual has more than one ABLE account for a period of 60 days, then they are subject to a 10% penalty and income tax on the funds, and again, they may affect eligibility for federally funded means-tested benefits. So it's important. I know another big question in terms of how you use accounts is, well, what if I have multiple accounts? And the answer to that is you are not allowed to have multiple ABLE accounts for the same beneficiary. If you're qualified to open up an ABLE account, you are only allowed to have one ABLE account at any given time. That being said, as we mentioned previously, you're not required to open up an ABLE account in your state of residence. So if you choose to open an account in another state and then after a few years, for whatever reason, you want to transfer into a different program, perhaps your home state now has an ABLE program and you want to bring it back to your state of residency, you can do what's called a program-to-program transfer, to where they transfer the balance into another ABLE account, and then simultaneously or at the same time shut down the original one, so that you, again, don't have multiple ABLE accounts open at the same time, because that would, as we just went over, result in tax penalties and could affect the beneficiary's eligibility for means-tested benefits. Again, the consequence for using the funds for a non-qualified disability expense, or which would just be a non-qualified expense, would be if any expense is deemed during an IRS audit to not be a qualified disability expense, then the funds are subject again to that 10% penalty and taxation, and again may affect the eligibility for federally funded means-tested benefits such as Medicaid or SSI. So once again, it is vitally important that folks understand how to use these funds appropriately and within the confines and the parameters of the law, so that they, again, will not find themselves in situations in which they could lose extremely vital and important supports and services related to are provided through federally funded means-tested programs. Again, such as the one we typically talk about is Medicaid, just because it provides such significant benefits to people with disabilities. All right. So let's talk a little bit about record keeping. What does this mean? So going back to, well, who exactly is responsible for making sure that these accounts are used appropriately? Is it the state ABLE program? Is it, you know, X, Y, and Z? Who knows? The answer is the IRS. The Internal Revenue Service is the entity ultimately responsible for ensuring that the ABLE accounts are being used appropriately. And we suspect that they're going to do that through random audits. So eventually, at some point, someone with an ABLE account will be audited, and we suspect that they will try to ensure two things, basically. One, that the individual is in fact eligible to be an ABLE account owner, meaning that they meet the eligibility that we discussed in last week's webinar about being allowed to have an ABLE account, and two, that the ABLE account's funds are being used on what they're supposed to be used for, which is, again, what we've been going over today, disability-related expenses. So, what are we recommending for people to make sure that they, if ever audited, that they have the right type of information to make sure that the IRS understands that they're using their accounts appropriately? So we are recommending that ABLE account owners keep track of their receipts of all purchases in which ABLE funds are used, because we suspect that in a situation like an audit, they would need to produce those. And in addition to keeping just the records of the receipts of the purchases, we also recommend keeping record of how each expense meets the definition of a qualified disability expense. So we're recommending that people, you know, jot down once they have an expense for each expense. It doesn't have to be exhaustive, I don't think, just a few sentences stating how that particular expense helps the beneficiary, helps the person with the disability maintain or increase their health, independence, or quality of life, how it relates to their disability, to make sure that in the event, if they are ever audited, that they have that information so that whoever is auditing them from the IRS can appreciate and sign off that the ABLE funds are being used appropriately. So, an example of what that might look like. So let me introduce everybody to my brother TJ. That's TJ on the right hand of your screen. He is an ABLE account owner, and he lives down in Texas. And he, every spring, he participates in therapeutic horseback riding, or what's called hippotherapy. I made that cost up. I honestly don't know if that's how much that costs, so don't take that to heart. But this is something that I would recommend, or that I actually do recommend to my mom, who has signature authority over his account, keep record of. So when he goes to his horseback riding, we use funds in his ABLE account to pay for it. And the explanation that I've written down for my mom is right here. As a result of DJ's disability, he has issues related to his mobility. We find that utilizing therapeutic horseback riding assists in strengthening his core and helps his ability to walk by improving his posture. This increases his health, independence, and quality of life. To put that away in her records, it doesn't have to have a picture, obviously, with the receipt from the place that he receives those services from. And if my brother's account, is ever audited, she'll have that information to show that that this horseback riding that he participates in is in fact a qualified disability expense, and she has a couple sentences there explaining on how it's related to his disability and how it helps his health, independence, and quality of life. So that's just an example of what a record keeping might look like for any given expense. Okay. So we wanted to provide just a few other examples before we turn it over to our panelists for some Q&A of different ways that people might be spending these funds. So we created some hypothetical profiles. So this one talks about Troy, who is a 4-year-old child with Down syndrome, and his parents have opened up an ABLE account for him. As a military family, Troy will have TRICARE health benefits for his whole life, but he is unable to get on a state's Medicaid wait list because the family moves frequently. Troy's parents are saving money in his ABLE account for his transition to adulthood. They contemplate the money to be used for post-secondary education, transportation, assistive technology, employment and training supports, independent living supports, and basic living expenses. Cool. Next profile is on Jack. Jack is an autistic adult with an ABLE account. He uses his ABLE account to pay for a job coach to help him at his workplace, employment, an iPhone to help him with time management, directions, and text-to-speech software, assistive technology, speech therapy sessions not covered by Medicaid or private insurance. We put this under health and wellness. Horseback riding lessons which relax him, health and wellness, and an accountant to file his taxes for him, financial management. Sophia is a college student with cerebral palsy who owns an ABLE account. She uses ABLE account funds for college tuition, books, a new laptop computer, and rent for a dorm room, Lyft, Uber, or taxi to get to school, housekeeper and cook at home for personal support services, and furniture for her dorm room, basic living expenses. Juan is an adult with severe mental illness. His parents are his legal guardians, and he has recently developed terminal cancer. His parents can use his ABLE account to pay for doctor visits, co-pays, prescriptions, health insurance premiums, transportation to get Juan to his chemo appointments, an attorney to review documents pertaining to his estate, and in the unfortunate circumstance that Juan passes away, they can use the funds for burial, funeral and burial expenses for Juan. So as you can see, again, ABLE funds can be used for a wide variety of different expenses. So with that, brings us to an end of the bulk of the presentation. I know that we covered a lot of information there, and there's probably a lot of terms that we use that weren't explained in this particular webinar, but have been explained in others, and have been explained in different pieces of material that we've developed through the ABLE National Resource Center. So again, I encourage folks to go to the website and check out some of our other archived webinars and some of our videos, short videos we have up there explaining different things like eligibility and how the funds can be created and different aspects related to ABLE accounts. And again, you can go there through our website at www.ablenrc.org. So with that, I want to now get some perspective from some of our guest panelists that I want to say first and foremost thank you to all of you for participating today in the webinar and offering us a little bit of insight as to your perspective about ABLE accounts and our topic today. And I wanted to go ahead and start with Jim, who is representing BNY Mellon. I wanted to say, Jim, tell us a little bit about what exactly BNY Mellon is and how you guys got involved in the ABLE space.
Well, first of all, Chris, awesome job. You always make a complex thing simple to understand or simpler to understand. As you mentioned, I'm with BNY Mellon, and BNY Mellon is actually the oldest bank in the United States. We just celebrated our 233rd birthday. We were founded by Alexander Hamilton, believe it or not. And our main clients are big institutions, governments, and most of the 50 states. And the states are the sponsors of these ABLE programs, and they've come to us and said, can you help us run these programs just like you help us run our College 529 programs? So that was really the genesis of BNY Mellon acting as what's known as the program manager for the ABLE programs. And as the program manager, we do things like check on enrollment documents, take in contributions, invest the contributions in the state-approved funds, and offer other services that you mentioned for disbursements. We process a lot of the tax reporting, and we also man call centers that respond to inquiries from beneficiaries and what we refer to as authorized legal representatives, or the administrators of some accounts for beneficiaries who can't handle their own accounts.
Great. Great. I appreciate that. So it's always great to take some of the things that we talk about on these webinars that are often kind of 35,000-foot kind of definitions and things, and really have somebody who works on the ground and can tell us a little bit about what these things look like. So from your perspective, Jim, I know that we talked about the ease in which somebody can access these funds. And the programs that you're administering, what exactly does that look like? If I am a person with an ABLE account in a program that you guys are administering, and I've identified something that is a qualified disability expense, what steps do I take to get the funds out of my ABLE account so that I can use them? What does that look like?
It's really straightforward, or we hope so. There's a couple of different ways you can access the ABLE funds and then make a disbursement. Most of the ABLE program managers have an online site that you can go into and access your account and request a distribution. And the distribution can be made to a linked bank account. It can be issued via a paper check and mailed to either the authorized legal representative or the beneficiary or a third party. And one thing that you mentioned, Chris, was many of the programs and the programs we administer have a prepaid card where a preset dollar amount can be put onto a prepaid card, and that card can be used anywhere a MasterCard can be used. So it can be used at a doctor's office, at a local grocery store, for any distribution and qualified distribution. And you mentioned something else during your presentation, Chris, and that was the record-keeping aspect. One of the benefits of the prepaid card and debit cards that are offered by other program managers is there's a record-keeping component that tracks all of those little disbursements for you and creates an electronic receipt that in the event an ABLE participant was ever audited, they could go back to their program manager, and if they were using their prepaid card or their debit card, they would be able to download all of their receipts and transaction history, and then present that to the IRS and saying, here's all my distributions using the prepaid card, and here's all of the things that I used it for. And those receipts can be really powerful, I think, when you're in front of the IRS.
That's great. Yeah, Jim, I appreciate you mentioning that, because I know that those certain folks have a little bit of hesitation around to what extent that record keeping is going to be burdensome in terms of using these ABLE accounts. And it's great that the administrators of these ABLE programs have thought about that and created a tool or invested in a tool that it sounds like really makes that a very streamlined process in terms of having that information available if the person is ever audited by the IRS. You bring up another good point that I wanted to touch on, actually, and that's to make sure that people understand that you don't, at least at this point in most circumstances, in order to open up an account, you're not walking into your local Bank of America, your local brick and mortar bank. You enroll and for the most part maintain the account completely online, which again makes it easy to enroll and maintain an account that might happen to be administered in a state outside of your residency. Now, Jim, which programs is BNY Mellon specifically administering or helping with?
Well, we have two programs that are up and running right now, the National ABLE for All program and the State of Oregon's ABLE program. And we're currently working with the State of Washington to roll out their program. And I can't say publicly yet, but we're working with a couple of other states as well. So we have about 9 months of experience under our belt. I mean, the oldest ABLE program has about 13 months, 14 months of experience. So we're learning things every day as ABLE matures and we see new use cases and new ways that we can help the community.
That's great. That's great. Well, certainly on behalf of the Able National Resource Center and behalf of a person who has a sibling that has an Able account, I just want to say thank you so much for your guys' enthusiasm and involvement in getting into the Able space and helping people with disabilities save for a better financial future. And certainly thank you for sponsoring the campaign, and we really appreciate that. I want to move now to Kelly Israel, who is the policy analyst for the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. I had mentioned previously that there was a paper done, a brief done on specifically on how ABLE funds can be used to help benefit employment opportunities for people with disabilities. And we have Kelly with us today, who was actually the primary author on that. So thank you, Kelly, for joining us today. Could you start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and telling us a little bit about the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network before we get into some of the highlights of the paper?
Absolutely. I am a proudly autistic woman and an attorney in Maryland, and the policy analyst of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, as Chris said. ASAN, which is short for the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, is the nation's leading self-advocacy organization by and for autistic people ourselves. So the organization helps autistic people and is also run by autistic people. We believe that all people should have the ability to determine the course of their own lives, whether they need support or not. We advocate for the unconditional acceptance of autistic people as part of their communities, the integration rather than segregation of all people with disabilities, and widespread access to the auxiliary aids and services autistic people need. So as ASAN's policy analyst, I wear a bunch of different hats. I'm doing a lot of things at a time. One of the major things I do is analyze laws and regulations to try and determine how they affect people with disabilities, including autistic people.
Excellent, excellent. Great, and I know obviously that ASAN is part of the ABLE National Resource Center, and we certainly appreciate all the expertise that you guys bring to the table during our monthly meetings and as we tackle some of the policy issues around ABLE. So as I said previously, I understand that you were the primary author of the publication we mentioned in the presentation regarding how ABLE funds could be used to increase positive employment outcomes for people with disabilities. Could you tell us a bit more about that paper and perhaps share some of the highlights with us?
Absolutely, Chris. One thing, though, can you hear me clearly?
We can hear you. Sound maybe you could be a little louder.
Okay, I'll try and be a little louder then. Can you hear me better now?
Great. Yep, sounds great.
Excellent. Sure. The policy brief focused on how ABLE accounts could be used to help ABLE account owners gain employment, maintain employment, and plan for the future. We wanted to put particular emphasis on how being able to save money in the ABLE account to pay for qualified disability expenses helps people maintain employment. First, because ABLE allows ABLE account owners to save money in tax-advantaged savings accounts, similar to the savings accounts possessed by people without disabilities, ABLE accounts can be used to provide employees with disabilities an extra layer of financial security. NDI conducted a survey a while back showing that people with disabilities tend to have far fewer rainy day funds than people without disabilities, or savings in the event of an emergency. All kinds of emergencies occur in an employment context. Like, let's say you need to get to work, you use a car to drive there, and your car breaks down. Or somebody having a healthcare crisis that interferes with their ability to work. People can lose their job in emergency situations if they don't have the funds to address the immediate problem. So a person who can't afford to fix the car they use to drive to work could be late to work and then lose their job. Now, there are a bunch of different reasons that people with disabilities lack rainy day funds for the most part, but one of them are the relatively low asset caps in federal benefits programs like SSI and Medicaid buy-in programs. A lot of people with disabilities rely on either the services or income they get from these programs. If the person with a disability has to adhere to the asset cap to maintain their eligibility, it's essentially impossible, or next to impossible, depending on the program itself, to save up enough for a good rainy day fund, which is usually something like $2,000 in the event of an emergency. Because ABLE accounts allow you to, in many situations, to save money past those asset limits, it becomes possible to use the ABLE account funds to save for unexpected expenses and thus maintain employment. Another major highlight is that ABLE accounts may be incredibly useful for helping a person with a disability towards greater financial literacy and independence. ABLE accounts encourage a person with a disability to take greater financial responsibility and plan better for their futures. And with greater financial literacy and independence, the person with a disability may be able to better understand how to achieve the desired career goals. For an example of how the state ABLE programs and the states in general, state governments in general, could aid in this, we can look towards American Job Centers. AJCs are authorized under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act to provide job seekers with a wide variety of different services, including job counseling, job search, and placement assistance, workshops, etc. One of our recommendations in the paper was that state ABLE programs should collaborate with banks and American Job Centers to help people understand how to set up an ABLE account and understand how ABLE accounts can contribute to that person's employment outcomes. For example, say there is a woman who wants to buy a laptop to aid in her job search. The American Job Center, in conjunction with the state ABLE programs and the banks, could help the woman set up the ABLE account and help the woman commit to a budget that includes regular ABLE account contributions, with a mind towards eventually using those funds for the laptop that the woman wants. That laptop would count as a qualified disability expense because it would, in this case, be helping the woman gain and maintain employment and improve her quality of life. Finally, ABLE accounts might be useful in some situations for people receiving public benefits when their public benefits don't cover a particular employment-related expense, similar to the gaps in coverage that Chris described. It's important to emphasize that people receiving public benefits should consult with benefits counselors who can determine how the ABLE account's existence and the beneficiary's desire to work will impact those benefits before they do anything. But with that said, here are a few pretty solid examples. Medicaid-funded supported employment services, for instance, probably wouldn't cover the cost of work-appropriate attire, for example, which is often crucial when you're taking a job that either formally or informally requires a certain style of dress. That would be considered a QD under the pretty broad definition used by ABLE accounts. Or perhaps someone has Medicaid-funded transportation that allows them to go to and from work. What if somebody's Medicaid-funded transportation provider simply doesn't show up one day? Accidents happen, but the person's going to be fired if they don't show up at work. So somebody holding a prepaid debit card could take a cab using funds from the ABLE account, which can then be reimbursed later. In this way, funds saved in an ABLE account can be used to address the little unexpected expenses related to employment for people who are relying on public benefits. We all experience these incidents, but in this way, the ABLE account can be used to cover them in ways that Medicaid ordinarily wouldn't.
Great. That was very comprehensive, Kelly. I appreciate that, and you make some very good points in there. While we all appreciate the supports and services provided by programs such as Medicaid, we often understand that the needs of people with disabilities oftentimes surpass the supports and services, and ABLE is a great way to supplement some of those supports and services to really create more of a comprehensive set of supports that can have beneficial impacts on people's lives, not just in day-to-day, but certainly in employment as well. So thank you for that. We appreciate that. And if folks are interested in reading that brief, you can find it on the LEAD Center's website at www.leadcenter.org. Thank you for that, Kelly. Lastly, I want to turn it over to Courtney Hansen, who's a parent, a disability advocate, and the blogger of Inclusion Evolution, empowering individuals with Down syndrome in school and work. Thank you for being with us, Courtney. I just want to get kind of, tell us a little bit about your blog and your experiences being a parent and what ABLE means for you, and I believe it is your daughter, and correct me if I'm wrong. But
that's fine. It's actually my son. That's okay. Thank you for having
I'm sorry.
me, Chris. Okay. So you can hear me okay then?
Yes.
Okay, great. Actually, you had the profile before. It was a 4-year-old with Down syndrome, Troy, and that's actually my son. That's our story. So I am a blogger, but first and foremost, I'm a proud military wife and a mother to 3 kids under 5, and that's, of course, my full-time job is with my kids. And so I have been advocating for self-determination for my son as well as others with Down syndrome, and I do a lot of my advocacy work on my blog, www.inclusionevolution.com. And so anyways, the ABLE account for us started last spring. We've had Troy's grandparents have asked us numerous times if they could open an account for Troy. And obviously we've told them that he could not have an account in his name. And so we started looking at what we could do to kind of create self-determination for Troy in the future. And when he was born, we opened a special needs trust, which was very expensive. And we soon learned that we really couldn't use that trust until we had passed away because of the cost of managing a trust. And so when ABLE passed after my son was born, we started looking into programs. And because we're military, we are very fortunate because of my son's disability and because my husband will retire with the military, Troy will be covered through TRICARE for the rest of his life. So healthcare needs are not really paramount to us. And so we started looking at ABLE for more of an adult transition tool that we could use to help him be financially independent. And because we're in the military, we have not been able to sign up for any Medicaid waiver wait lists. Many states have those, but we've moved to 4 different states in the last decade, and our son will have lived in numerous states by the time he reaches 18. And so it was really important to us that we start to save for him because we're not sure, of course, because he's so young, if he'll be eligible for those Medicaid waivers when he reaches 18. And also just looking at policies in Washington and the way things are going, we're really worried that Medicaid will be cut. And so we do want something that will supplement Medicaid. And so what we've done is I basically went on ABLE NRC's website. I spent about an hour researching all the different programs. I looked at states that we're attached to. I'm from Florida. My husband's from Michigan. We're living in Ohio. But I started realizing that I didn't have to look at those states because a lot of the programs allow out-of-state residents. And I happened upon Tennessee's program that basically had no cost to open and no cost to maintain. And I took that to my financial advisor, and he agreed. He looked at all the programs too and agreed that was the best for us. It does not have a debit card, but for us, it's really a long-term savings vehicle for when Troy becomes an adult. So at this point in time, we don't need the debit card, and we can always change over to another program later when he needs to use that debit card as an adult.
Great, great. Yeah, I'm glad we were able to profile your son, and we certainly appreciate the perspective. Could you tell us a little bit about your blog?
Yes, this month I've actually been piggybacking basically what you guys have presented in your webinars and what I've found on your website. I focus on Down syndrome, but I have other disability advocates that come to my blog. And so every Friday in the month of August, I have been doing basically a blog post about the myths of ABLE, about how you can open an account, how you're eligible. And so I've really just been trying to piggyback what you guys have been teaching on these webinars and have been trying to kind of get the word out about Able to Save. I've also kind of teamed up with Disable Poverty, which is a campaign that looks at financial independence for people with disabilities. I've done some posts on that as well. So feel free to go on to inclusionevolution.com, and I have a Facebook page too. You can kind of see some of the posts I've made about ABLE and really getting the word out. And a lot of people in the Down syndrome community are getting excited about this and looking to my blog to kind of get some information to move forward.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much for your perspective, and thank you so much for the support of the campaign and getting the word out there via your blog and all the information that you have, sharing your experience with other parents and other people with disabilities. I think with that, we have about 1 minute. I just wanted to let everybody know that as part of our hashtag Able to Save campaign. Next Wednesday, it's Webinar Wednesday. We're going to be focusing on managing ABLE funds. So we're going to be talking about the fact that these savings accounts are not only savings accounts, but they're really investment accounts. And what exactly does that mean, and what different options are out there, and what people might want to take into consideration when choosing one investment option over another. And again, that's on August 23rd, Wednesday, at the same time, 2 o'clock. And for registration information, you can either follow us on Facebook, Able National Resource Center, or go to the website again at www.ablenrc.org. We apologize we didn't have time to get to some of the questions in the question box, but we collect those and we analyze them, and we often make Q&A sheets that we publish on the website as a result of those questions that we get through the webinars. So again, thank you so much, Kelly, Courtney, and Jim, for participating and sharing your expertise with us and our audience. And thank you to everybody who was able to register and participate today across the country. We appreciate it, and we hope to talk to all of you again a week from today at 2 o'clock Eastern. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.